and the constant access to solitude, busting information.
What's your sense of what society is going to look like 20, 30 years from now when a whole generation of young people who have no memory of life experience without a cell phone in their hands, a smartphone in their hands, have never really had that experience of solitude to begin with?
Well, I mean, that generation is sort of wildly more anxious than any other previous generation. This is correlational, but it's sort of a hypothesis I make in the book is we take Generation Z, which is the first generation to enter their young adolescence with sort of ubiquitous access to smartphones and social media. They use it a lot more than we do. I mean, they really have banished all solitude. And demographically speaking, anxiety and anxiety-related disorders just jumps off the charts. As soon as you get to the first cohort that was born late enough to have access to ubiquitous smartphones and social media, it's a jump that's literally off the charts in the sense that the demographers had never seen a jump that large before on anything they measured from generation to generation. So it's literally off the charts. And it's probably because of what's happening with the phones, and probably in part because this is a radical thing to do to a human mind, is to banish all solitude. So they're definitely much more anxious, which is problematic. Sherry Turkle at MIT has this book, Reclaiming Conversation, where she talks a lot about how in the workplace now, this generation coming to the workplace is having a very hard time just interacting because they've done most of their communication digitally, but actually face-to-face communication is very complicated and nuanced and practiced. And that's what you're supposed to spend your adolescence doing, is sort of navigating awkward social situations and trying to figure out how to do it. And so they're having a really hard time doing things like sitting down with a boss. Right. And talking to them. They're trying to keep all the communication electronic, which doesn't work because, I mean, there's no emotional nuance in emails.
Yeah.
And everyone you have no idea. I mean, if I'm sitting across from you, I know if you're mad at me or not. I can tell by subtleties in your face. But if you send me an email, I don't know. And so I might read it as like you're furious at me, or I might read it as because there's no nuance in it, right? So this is certainly a problem.
Well, young people don't even email; they just do text. And I just know from dealing with a lot of young people, it's like, listen, you need to call this person or set a meeting and go talk to them and sort out whatever problem you have.
That's a big ask.
And that is anxiety. Yeah, it's like, no, I just want to send this text. And let me read the text. And I'm like, this is not going to solve your problem. But there's a fear of that, that analog interaction.
Well, the reason there's a fear is because it's just really hard. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand the literature on the intersection between sociality and neuroscience and psychology. Our brains are set up to do this, right? The whole thing about our brains, human brains, are to be these social processing computers, but it's incredibly difficult. Like a face-to-face conversation is an incredibly complicated dance of all sorts of mental systems. And it's hard to overestimate how much neuronal processing goes into this. And it's very hard. And so you have to practice it a lot. And it's what you're supposed to be doing. Babies practice this. You're supposed to be practicing as children. Your entire teenage years are socially awkward, in part because you're practicing. Right? You're getting a sense of what's appropriate, what's not, how to read facial cues. You learn about things like limbic consonance, which is trying to actually match the intonation and pacing of the other person's voice because that makes it more comfortable. This is really, really practiced. And so for most people, by the time they get to adulthood, they have their 10,000 hours. But if you don't get those 10,000 hours because you did this instead, you looked at the screen, and then you throw someone into the major league game, it's really scary because they're not good at it.